Welcome to this Farming for a Better Climate podcast.
The biggie for me is carbon, is carbon sequestration. That for me is the one thing in the room that we need to really get pinned down and understand how that works.
Hello, I'm Poppy Frater, Sheep and Grassland Specialist at SAC Consulting. I am joined here today by Alex Brewster of Rotmell Farm and Graham Lofthouse of Bankhouse Farm. The reason I have asked you both to contribute to this podcast is that you both carefully considered and thoroughly researched grazing strategies on your farm. I mean, I know, Alex, you did your Nuffield Scholarship in the topic, Powering Pasture and the Relevance of Red Meat in the 21st Century. And then, Graham, anyone that's heard you talk will know the level of knowledge that you have on grazing management. You talked at the Grazing debate last year. That's fantastic. Yeah. And that certainly shines through in the sort of flock and herd performance at Bankhouse Farm, but then also in all the other extracurricular activities that you do off farm and contributing to events. So I'm really glad to have you both here this afternoon. Grazing is a complicated topic. As soon as you veer away from feeding animals from a bag, you have a whole host of other aspects to work with. So you've got the soil characteristics, the plant physiology, the animal behaviour, to the rumen microbiology. It is complicated, and I don't think there are many scientists out there that deal with that level of interaction between things adequately enough, to be honest with you. I think it's a really difficult subject, and it definitely challenges the brain. And then as a consequence, there are knowledgeable people like yourselves will agree on some aspects when it comes to grazing management, but no doubt will disagree on some aspects too, as we're all understanding what's right for our farms and also understanding and researching what's best as well. So I just thought it'd be good to start just to hear generally about your farm, your grazing strategies that you both practice. So Graham, I might start with yourself if that's okay. What do you do at Bankhouse Farm?
Okay, right. So grazing strategy, it's a bit of, three systems almost, I suppose. So not all the farm suits doing paddock rotational grazing, which for me would be a spell of probably anything from a day to 3 days of grazing and then going to rest period. We then got set stocking on certain areas of the farm, and then we're techno grazing, which is daily shifts on small cell areas of probably about 0.2 to 0.4 of a hectare per day, intensively stocked, generally done only with cattle. So that really encompasses what our grazing systems are on the farm. It's as simple as that. And we target them at the areas that they best suit and the stock class that they best suit. And I don't feel that everything always works for every class of stock. And when you said earlier on about everything's always changing in farming and ideas change, I would say that I think, it'll be interesting to see Alex's point of view in a second, but I would say my thoughts are always changing probably every year about what I'm doing and how I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And
I'm sure anyone can appreciate that. If you're not changing all the time, then you're probably not developing and growing your business. So good. Okay. Alex, can you talk us through what you do at Rotmell?
Yeah, we're a traditional sense upland hill beef and sheep farm. We're about 13% improved pasture, about 200 hectares worth of what I call hill parks. It's not great grazing, but it's more upland, old pastoral grasses, and then there's 550 hectares worth of in the general hill country, bracken, heather, rocks and the like. And a bit like what Graham was alluding to, I think this is the journey. So we started off state stocking, and then through the help of QMS and the grazing groups, we started to see the light, excuse the pun, and started trying to harvest more light with rotational grazing. And that worked pretty well for us. It was a big step change in performance and production, and we achieved a lot from it. But there was a couple of key events, and a big event for me was I was very mindful that on this unit we can't improve it with a sprayer, a fertilizer spreader, or a seed barrow or a plough. There's just too much rough country. And so part of my journey has been how do we improve the performance and profitability of the farm with managing the landscape that we've got. And that then was what kind of started changing my thoughts around grazing strategy. And secondly, I tended to find we were car crashing in the rotational grazing system. We tended to be car crashing the sheep system back into the worm zone again, into the parasite zone. And that then got me thinking a little bit deeper again about what we're doing here. It's really rotational, there should be more rotational grazing than creating more stress on the animal. And that then got me, I suppose, further down the line of a longer grass grazing system, a bit more holistically managed, longer rest periods. And we're still, very much on that journey. Maybe a year and a half, 2 years into it, and still a lot to be learned. But again, as we're trying to make the whole farm perform as a whole rather than just key areas of the farm.
Okay, so you're taking a much bigger perspective, whereas previously you might have sort of optimised your productivity on your cultivatable land.
Yeah, it was, up to a couple of years ago, we were, effectively farming a third of the farm for 9 months of the year. And we had a lot of extensive hectares not doing a huge deal. But the value and the cost savings to be made in this business was trying to utilise these more extensive hectares as a buffer zone. And as we've broken into them, we've started to realise that we are now finding clovers and trefoils, plantains, and a lot of the veggies and herbs. We're actually finding them out in this rough country. So as we're creating longer rest periods, we're getting bigger animal impact onto it. The quality of the grazing's starting to increase as we go. So the reliance on the better countries is dropping off. So we're not pushing it quite as hard. And we're building more feed in the wings for the shorter days in the year.
Okay, and
I think what we do suits our system and our farm type. It probably won't suit every farm across Scotland, and I think Graham's alluded to that too. You want to play to your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously, Alex made a really valid point there. It's like playing to your strengths. I mean, we have quite a small hectare, so we're only 113 hectares of our own, and we're renting in about another 8 hectares annually. This year we've actually had another chunk added on to that, so we're actually farming 145 hectares this year, so we've got another chunk added on. But the thing for us for me, I should say, or us as a business, was that we need to maximise profitability from every hectare because of our sort of limited area. I mean, Alex has got quite a different farm to us. I mean, we've still got quite steep ground. We go from 600 feet up to just over 1,000 feet. A fair percentage of north facing stuff as well. So we've got about 15% of our land's north facing. And it's limited in some regards, but it was trying to maximise the output from that area. And not just in kilos of output, but maximising the profit you made, or pounds of profit you made, was the essential thing, because we were at that point where we were a limited farm by our area, and if you like, the squeeze was coming on. We needed to make sure that we were up in our game, otherwise we weren't staying viable. Not in the past system of set stocking that we're working in. We couldn't do that, and I think we haven't gone. We're not doing holistic management, or we're not doing the same as what Alex is doing with the long grass grazing, because it doesn't work quite as well for me anyway. I've tried a little bit of it and it hasn't worked quite as well. And I think a little bit of that's to do with, I just feel that the leafier, shorter vegetative pasture recovers much quicker. And we're doing the same as Alex. We're building a buffer going into the winter. And that's been the big thing for us, is building that buffer going into the winter and reducing feed costs.
just taking a little step back a bit, just to further define your grazing methods. So, Alex, you have much a longer rest period, and some of our listeners might be more familiar with deferred grazing, or like a standing hay crop being left. And you probably rest it for what, a couple of months, is it?
Yeah, very flexible, probably depends the time of year. I mean, this spring we were short of grass, so we were coming around quicker than we would have liked to. The whole unit's not built yet, so we're still working hard on infrastructure, fencing systems, water systems. So we're not as efficient across the ground as we possibly could be. But there is times of the year where we're back around, especially in the spring when grass is going flat out and the quality is good. When we are on a 21-day shift, a lot like what Graham would be. But as the season starts to stretch, we start getting grass ahead of us, then we don't actually really maybe speed up the rotation as much. We're allowing that grass to get away from us. I'm looking to build this biomass in the ground, and then we're kind of harvesting off what we need. We're deferring out, we're making silage off the side of that at the same time. And we're trying to build a greater diversity of plants into the pasture. And then we're not so reliant on any one species of grass, be it a ryegrass or whatever it may be, to have the quality exactly right in that one particular plant. So we have a wider array of plants we can graze on, which are always at very slightly different stages. And especially in the sheep side of things, I think they really quite enjoy that self-selection. So we don't need to deck it as much. And if I need to deck something, then we have this, a fairly big mob of cattle now, which gives us that power and operation that we can flatten a few hectares pretty quickly and then move on again.
Great. So it's almost like a spectrum between the sort of big, tall grazing. At certain times of the year, you'll have your short leafy pasture in the spring, but then as you adapt to the season conditions, it might become taller and leafy, and you're okay with that for diversity purposes, etc.
Yeah, I'm okay with it because I think you suit the stock class to the feed you've got in front of you.
Yeah.
The bit that's interesting, I think, more about the transition to taller grass grazing is the sheep seem to enjoy it far more than I initially thought they would. And they've been quite interesting watching how they graze, nibble, and move around, do what they do, how they actually trample a lot of it down and create this quite a nice understory, which then holds a lot of moisture, holds a lot of heat. And when you dig in through that, there's a lot of microbial action, a lot of worms active down in that zone. And then later on in the year, we tend to see these hectares produce a lot of grass into the back end. And I think partly because we're holding the soils at a more constant state, the plant doesn't actually slow down as much. It's not as susceptible to frost. And it's probably not as susceptible to a shortage of moisture either, because we're not using it through evaporation in a more open sward base.
And then Graham, I think, is it fair to say where Alex might adapt his system less to let the grass go to head and things like that a bit more, you would adapt it to shorten the rotation to keep the grass short and leafy in the aims of maximising output?
Yeah, that's probably fair. I think the big thing we do is obviously limited area, so obviously maximising the amount of silage we produce going into the winter and stuff as well. Or like we're doing at the moment, we've got 7 hectares of forage rape in and a couple of hectares of fodder beet in, so putting more forage crop in to carry us through the winter period has become a sort of key point for us. So yeah, when there's excess at a point, taking something out, and then that's part of our reseeding policy, I suppose, as well. But I think Alex had a good point. Obviously, he's looking at diversity of type of pasture and plants within the mixture and stuff like that, or naturally developing. I've certainly changed my perspective on what should be within a mixture, probably in the last 2 to 3 years, and going forward, I think that'll change more. I wasn't quite at the stage of monocultures, but I did find that 3-4 variety mixes were much easier to control. Looked really attractive, looked really good. You grew a lot of grass, but I know you weren't producing as many kilos as you could be. So just because you were producing a lot of grass didn't mean to say it was actually turning into kilos of live weight going off. And I think on the sheep side of things, it's quite different. I operate as kind of leader-follower system with the ewes and lambs. So we have ewes and lambs out in front, and we have, similar to Alex, we use a mob of cows, we have a group of cows following along behind, not quite the size Alex is doing, but we're kind of on hectare paddocks. So 200 ewes and 400 lambs and 40 cows chasing behind. Tends to reap the best rewards for us because we don't graze, like I was saying, we don't graze too far down at the sward with the lambs. So I think putting them under too much pressure has an effect. But even in that system, there's lower growth rates than you would get in a set stock system. So, I mean, we've done comparable figures this year across the board, So ewes that were paddocked on their own, ewes that were paddocked with cows following. There was a 40 gram a day difference between them. And the set stocked ones were actually growing 40 grams a day in front of everybody else. So there's 80 grams of difference between set stocked and the ewes that were paddock grazed on their own. And that's just because they're having to graze too short. Like Alex was saying, they're grazing right down sort of 4 centimetres. So I think going forward, I probably will set stock for longer with ewes and lambs, or I have to have cows in behind them to maximise.
And even then, it's the 40 gram per day penalty.
Yeah, it's a penalty. It's a penalty. But when you set stock them, did actually this year let some lambs back out for the last 2 weeks prior to weaning, because I felt they were being impinged too much. So I wanted to just let them have what they could to maximise that coming up to. I didn't want a real stress on them going into weaning. And the grass that was done with is growing much slower than the rest. So it's getting that balance. And the balance for me actually feels at the moment to be sheep followed by cattle. But we've also got mixtures going in this year, which have got plantain, chicory, white clovers, red clovers, and fetchalolin as well.
Yeah, it's thinking ahead at the same time of looking at your performance in the short term, because I guess like if you've not got your thinking ahead right, that'll be your feed supplies going to tapping time, and when you're trying to get condition on ewes, and then it'll have a knock-on effect next year. It's interesting you say that, because some people say when they went to rotational grazing, their lamb performance actually improved. And I'm just wondering whether is it a stocking rate effect? Do you think there's a medium between set stocking and your rotational grazing where you could?
Well, seeing as both of us are sitting here, Alex, what do you think? When you went to rotational grazing, did your lamb performance go up or down?
Our lamb performance went up, and our flock performance generally jumped by 20%. And we as I said, upland sheep system, so we would scan 130, and then we went within a year and a half we were scanning 150%. With a sort of 10% loss to docking, but the live weight weaned at weaning time jumped by 2 kilos as well. So we got a big response to that.
Yeah.
But I also, so as pasture quality across the farm had then evolved and changed, we're now moving or have moved away. We are moving away from a black-faced flock to a composite flock. So I've got my first composite lambs on the ground this year, and they're currently running 2 kilos ahead of everybody else on average, which is, it's another jump in performance again. So I think there's a big play here on genetic resilience of the animals on farm, and you have to apply a thing. You've touched on this, Graham, too. You have to apply enough pressure to have a percentage of your genetics failing each year. So you're always selecting the more resilient breeding stock that cope with the management pressure getting put on them. Because we're trading a very fine line here between getting fertility in performance, whether it's a lamb or a calf, harvesting, optimizing good grass utilization, having enough feed stuck up our sleeves so we're not buying in concentrate, or as little as we can, but also maximising the sale price. And we're balancing a lot of fine lines here, and if we get one element of it wrong, you can car crash the system very quickly, and it's real hard to pull it back.
Yeah, I'd agree with pretty much everything Alex said there. I mean, the only thing I would say, obviously, my growth rates went down on my lamb. So I think there's a competition. I've always maintained there's a competition. We were already a high stocked farm, I suppose. So we were running 5 ewes and lambs, 5 ewes with twin lambs to every acre at that point. So 12 to the hectare set stocked previously. So we were quite a high stocking rate. When we went to the paddock system, lamb growth rates dropped. And I felt that was the competition. Once you get to 8 weeks, I felt there was always a competition between the lamb and the ewe for the best quality material. When you look at animal behaviour, lambs follow their mother. So there's a harvesting effect. If you've got 200 ewes and 400 lambs in a hectare, it's a very small area that every ewe and pair of lambs has to operate in. I felt mum always wins the battle. She always gets the best quality material. I think clover in the sward has a big effect as well. Alex has obviously talked a lot about, diversity of pasture and the elements in there. And I think obviously we need to modify that, or I need to modify that slightly. But I think there's also a genetic thing. I think Alex has just said it there as well. I think not every type of sheep or type of cattle will necessarily fit the system. So there are probably genetics out there that better suit it than others, and it's identifying those genetics that operate in that environment. And yeah, like Alex says, we've been doing that for a while. It should be improving. Things should improve because we're identifying ram lambs which are performing in that system. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see going forward. But I do feel that the lamb and the ewe, if you graze very short, so I'm talking about coming down to this 4 centimetre level. When you look at bite size, the dairy industry, I mean, I'm from a dairy farming background originally, and my family are and stuff. You've got, for a ewe to harvest, its maximum amount of grass per day, if it's rearing twins, it really needs to not go below 6 centimetres. It can't do it. It can't take enough bites in a day to get that dry matter in. So I've always felt that that's the big thing. It's the number of bites she has to take in a day to get that in. And when you look at her body weight, she's actually producing the same amount of milk as a dairy cow is in peak lactation. So, I mean, the dairy guys, they've got the benefit of buffering. They've got that option of buffering. So if a cow comes into a parlour, they can buffer morning or night. We're not able to buffer.
No, and it's probably the most critical time in the lamb's growth, isn't it? Well, they're at lactation. So getting that bit right really sets the scene, doesn't it? So we've talked a little bit about diversity, and Graham, you've talked a bit about how you're integrating different species into the sward. And Alex, I get the impression it's more of a natural regeneration, the new species coming in rather than sown species. Is that the case?
No, we're sowing species too. So we're still reseeding. There's forage cropping. We've got 16 species forage mixed in the ground just now, growing away. And there's quite a lot of herbs and trefoils, red clover in the forage mix, and it's dropped in to set. Then we'll direct drill a 20 species grass mix in the springtime. But I'm setting up the ground now for the grass mix. There's quite a high weighting of red clover in the forage mix, as long as radishes, rapes. There's oats in it, couple of rapes, couple of kales, couple of turnips, a couple of vetches, clovers, red and white, a bit of plantain. There's quite a real random mixture of stuff in there. Beetroot. I can't grow sugar beet where I am. Country's too poor, so I'm using the poor man's beet. I've got beetroot in my mix. And then we graze that off through the winter again. It's buffering feed. Some of it's for the breeding heifers, the wean heifer mob that we keep through. Some of it's for ewes. And then the clovers, when they start kicking on in the springtime, when I see that red clover starting to grow again in the spring, we then go and direct drill straight into the 20 species mix. And I'm using the clovers and the carryover seed as a means of feeding the microbes in the springtime. So again, the theory behind it is then the soils are then kicking a wee bit, and we should get a good take of grass, and we don't then rush to graze this reseed 20 species mix. We'll give it maybe 6 weeks. I'll rattle through it with sheep possibly once, give it another 6 weeks or 8 weeks until it's up to my knee height, maybe more. Seed heads on the grass, and then we go through at that to a point where I'm more of a cattle and just flatten it. And I'm looking to bracket a lot of it over. I'm looking to throw all that seed head back onto the grass, seed head back onto the ground, trample it in. And any thin bits or blanks or any of these wee bits you want filled out a bit more, you then reseed it again with the initial grass reseed, if that makes sense. The reason I got into these mixes was when I was hunting along the hedgerows and watching what stock graze as you're moving them. They're always got a head buried in a bush someplace, eating something. and we started sticking in all these wee vetches and herbs and clovers we're finding in the hedgerows. And then, funnily enough, we've started to find these up in the rougher country. As we've created more rest, the seed banks kicked on now, and we're getting these natural seeds are reappearing in the upland pastures. Never seen them before. There was things we looked at last night when I was having a look around with the family. We've got now vetches in full flower out in the hill, and I've never seen that before ever. So we're just sowing the seeds that we're finding naturally in the farm, but we seem to have lost that seed bank from the improved pasture soils.
And are you still sort of liming and putting fertiliser on as you were before, or have you changed that in light of favouring the native species on the farm?
We haven't used fertiliser since 2002. We've been organic for a long stint, and then we had a cross-compliance issue with bracken, so we had to deal with that. I don't think we've limed in about 6 years, so there's a theory, and this will cause a debate, that the pH is driven by the microbial and humus populations within the soil. And if we're using a lot of ferts and chems, they're all highly acidic, so you're actually lowering the pH as you apply these products. So we haven't been applying them, and I'm trying to push and build pH then through a greater diversity, trying to build humus, organic matter, and also increase the microbial life within the soil, along with worm populations. And that, in theory, should lift pH. The last time I soil tested was 3 years ago, so I'm due another one of all soil tests this year. And either I'm kind of partly right, or very, very badly wrong. But we have been doing quite a lot of work with rock dust, and that has been really, really interesting. Really interesting.
Just to avoid, I guess, contradicting some of our other messages too much, and also like confusing the listener too much, I guess. You're not saying that soil pH, aiming for target soil pH is a bad thing. You just think, well, and fertilizers do acidify the soils, we know that, but you just think you've got a more sustained approach to it through working with the natural processes. Is that fair?
Yeah, I fully get that we need to get soils to 6.5 or 7 pH on that scale. And a worm cast is about pH of 7. And they do have a phenomenal ability to neutralise soil. So I'm fully focused on getting there, but I can't run a lime spreader over rocks.
Okay.
So so my mindset comes from a different space. If I had 900 hectares of lovely rolling border countryside, then the fast response is it's a rattle on a lime spreader. So I can't do that. So I'm coming at it from a different angle, and it will probably take me a lifetime of failing to maybe eventually get a success. But that's where we're starting from.
Perfect. I did tell the listener this is going to be complex and probably contradictory in some ways. So I'll just bring Graham in there, if that's okay, in terms of...
We're all desperately looking for 980 acres of rolling border countryside. You just can't get your hands on it. That's the problem, Alex. Like, we're all in the same boat. Don't worry about it. I'm in the same boat too. Just can't get hold of it. Yeah, we're testing a quarter of the farm every year, basically. I'm actually maybe going to be on the other thing. We don't lime as much as we did by a long shot, and for all the reasons Alex said, so we've cut back nitrogen usage massively. So formerly a small dairy farm of just 60 hectares, and Dad was putting on nitrogen probably 6 months of the year, and he was probably maxing out near your 200 kilos of N at one point in time, back in the 80s and stuff like that. We're now down to under 50 kilos of N a hectare across the board, and that includes silage ground and everything. We've stuff this year that hasn't been had any nitrogen at all on it. P's and K's, I think things have stabilised a bit more. We're pretty careful about what we put on with P's and K's as well. A lot of it's coming from our stuff with muck, natural muck and stuff that's on farm. The lime, I was pretty pro pushing up to 6.5 for a while, and I've now backed off to that. I don't want to go above 6.5 certainly. I think there's quite a complex interaction, which Alex is probably more knowledgeable than I am about, with other micronutrients that are required by livestock. I think you can get lockups of certain elements. If you go too high, would be my thing. So I'm kind of more cautious about not going above 6.5. Certainly want to be somewhere between 6 and 6.5, but don't want to go much above the 6.5.
Yeah, there are some that are locked up, but then it's not economical above 6.5 anyways, is the argument, isn't it? So.
No, so I don't want to go above that, but we're not liming as much as we were, probably because we've reduced the amount of inorganic N that's going on. We don't have a huge percentage of clover in some of our swards. Some are better than others, but we don't have massive amounts of clover in the sward. But I think a lot of what we produce through the peak of the season is from photosynthesis. I think a lot of it is driven that way. We're creating a solar panel, a big solar panel, a very active solar panel, a lot of leaf there from sort of April right through till August, September time, keeping it vegetative and leafy. When I let it get away towards seed head and stuff, and it's a different thing Alex is trying to achieve with, getting fertility into rougher parts of the farm. We're not really trying to achieve that. We really feel that fertility is pretty good in most of the ground. If we let it get away with seed head, just don't get that kick, don't get that regeneration, that quick recovery from it, which is the important factor with the sort of stocking level we're running, is to get that quick recovery. And then we need to build covers going into the autumn so that we've got the carry, because some of the land we rent, we only get till October time. We lose that. So just when you're wanting to expand your stocking, or you reduce your stocking density across the farm, we're actually concentrating even more.
Good. Yeah, it's thinking ahead all the time in terms of what your impact now is going to have an effect on your pasture productivity, and because you've got such a high stocking pressure over the winter, you can't afford to let it go like that. Okay, that makes sense. I'm glad you said you've reduced your nitrogen fertilizer, because it's a big part of, we're funded to do this through Farming for a Better Climate. So it's the Scottish Government programme. And people often ask, what's grazing management? What grass management got to do with climate change? And I think that's a big part of it, resource use efficiency. So one, you've been able to reduce your nitrogen fertilizer, which has a carbon footprint associated with it. It's quite a big one. On the soil, the production of fertilizer results in greenhouse gas emissions, but then also added to the soil, that's nitrous oxide emissions, which is quite a potent greenhouse gas. But then on the other hand, if you're able to reduce concentrate feeding, again, any feed that you bring onto the farm, that comes with it an associated carbon footprint. So you can reduce that through improving your grass resource. That all helps add to the challenge, the climate change challenge, helps to fight it.
Point really worth making is that so carbon, Graham alluded to photosynthesis drives the system as it does mine. Well, in that process, the plants are absorbing CO2 and it puts oxygen back out. In a really diverse sward, what we really need to do is stabilise these carbons into the soil. And the more diverse the sward is, the greater the diversity of spore space in the soil. And the microbes and the fungi stabilise the carbon, the CO2 in the spore space in the soil through a really well-managed grassland system. And as we understand more about diversity, resilience, climate resilience, genetic resilience, farming has a massive potential to stabilise a huge amount of carbon and CO2 into the soils that we manage. And it's a great, really good story. It sets the industry in a really great place, but it also makes you feel a real value to your day job when you know you're contributing that to society as well as producing a really healthy food.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. Graham, would you like to come in on that?
I was just going to. I was thinking about the diversity of mixture and stuff like that, and all the points Alex has pointed about, capturing carbon in the soil. I think we've missed a huge opportunity in the agricultural industry there's not enough being done about genetics within plant species that are used across the board. We've almost been sold down the road of perennial ryegrasses, which respond amazingly well to inorganic fertilizer. I mean, they respond amazing to it. And most of the trial work that's done is around high inputs of N on trial plots. And I mean, like I've alluded to, I've changed our system or our management slightly and changed the type of mixture. And I don't think we've actually got the mixtures right at all yet. I think there's lots to be looked at in regard to that. I think you go back through the annals of history, like Timothy's, Coxfoots, things like that, really resilient grasses, really good at coping with, extremes of temperature, water logging, all these things. They can cope with these things really well. But there's been no genetic or no breeding technology or anything looked at from that aspect at all. There's been no research done at all in these species. So I think we've been concentrated totally on one single, if you like, species, one group. Whereas actually within farming, we need greater diversity of stuff to look at, to utilise it to its best potential. And then that does, and I totally buy into it. I want to get better rooting. I have a farm which it can be waterlogged, it can burn out dry in the summertime, and we're seeing climate change undoubtedly. So we've got to look at plants that adapt well in these situations. And I do think there's a difference with cattle and sheep. I think cattle will cope on perennial ryegrass, and I think the dairy guys have been getting away with it as well because they are buffering. So they've been putting fibre into the diet in different forms, whether that's whole crop, beet pulp, whatever. Something's been going in that diet and buffering a probably very high nitrogen plant and making it work. Whereas for the beef and sheep industry, or more so the sheep bit, I don't think it works particularly well for the rumen of that animal, that type of feed going in. I think we see greater levels of scouring and stuff within lambs because we've got too high a nitrogen plant that's going into them, and it's probably loaded with either residual N or N that it's harvesting at that point in time. And that can even be N from the clover plant that's there, but it's sticking into it, sticking up this really lush, leafy bit of grass. And these lambs are not performing on it, whether we haven't looked at that whole thing. That takes a whole lot of money and a whole lot of different avenues.
So complex, rather than just one species looking at the yield, you're looking at the persistency. Yeah. You're having to look at the whole sort of community as a whole. Yeah. I think that, I know what you're saying.
I mean, there's some really good work done in Ireland, but Tommy Boland won't let me say it was him. Tommy Boland's done some amazing work on trial plots. The only thing I would say about those trial plots is it does need to be scaled up. I mean, those trial plots were 40 ewes on a paddock with a paddock grazing system. That's very different when we look at actual pressure in an area. If you put 200 ewes in a hectare with 400 lambs, even though it's the same density of stocking with 40 ewes, 200 ewes, they might feel more pressure just by the pure numbers that are there. Whereas 40 ewes, they might think, oh, I know everybody in that group. And I do wonder if there's an interaction with how animals feel comfortable or how they work with that. Whereas cattle, I mean, like we've got 53 cattle standing on 0.2 a hectare for a couple of days. And they're growing like mad. I mean, they're absolutely flying like they did last year. I mean, it's 8 ton of weight is on every hectare they're on. It's a huge amount. They love it. So I think we have to understand how animals behave as well. It's not just about chucking them in an area.
But you see the researcher's challenge there.
Yeah.
It just takes me back to the start, having to cross all these disciplines from soil science to animal behaviour. It's just, and I think that's part of the reason why the research on grazing systems is lacking, and sequestration and the benefit over different grazing systems. And I think that's it's just really complex to account for all the variables and the nature of it. But is it fair to say with yourself, Graham, the more sort of paddock grazing, short rotation, you've noticed an improvement compared to the set stocking? Is that the way to go, rotational grazing for yourself versus set stocking?
For the cattle, it's been undoubtedly a huge success for the cattle. But again, that comes down to the challenge. The calve isn't. So we calve from about 24th of April, calve everything outside, and we drift calves. So calves are being born in paddocks, and then the cows are moving on, they aren't calved, and that's how it works. Works really well, but you haven't got the competition between calve and cow for grass until you get to sort of September, October time, by which time we've got calves forward creep grazing under a wire. Yeah, from our strategy, so I suppose the big thing with me is I don't really want to be in a paddock more than 2 or 3 days, 3 days at a max, just to get that recovery. The shorter the time, the better, to be honest, like than that. Quick rotations, in and out, works really well. The sheep, we're set stocked at lambing time, so we're lambing most of them outside these days. Set stocked outside. We're waiting until those lambs are a sort of minimum of a month old before we start mobbing them up. And then not everything can be paddocked, as I've said before, because not all the ground suits that system. We've got a river runs through the farm and 2 roads through the farm as well, so it can be complex. But the sheep, yeah, again, sort of a day, 2 days in a paddock, preferably with a group of cows following behind them. Mature cows, never first calvers, always mature cows. I don't like having 2-year-old heifers chasing sheep, because we're basically using them to take it down to the 4 centimetres is what we're doing. So we're putting the pressure on them because they haven't got that demand for as high level of milk.
And
yep.
that doesn't affect the calf weaning weights?
No, I mean, our calf weaning weight, we used to creep feed from about sort of August time till weaning, and our calf growth rates have continually been about 1.2 to 1.3 kilos per day average on milk alone, and grass at the end, obviously. But again, like I say, they can creep forward under the wire, so we have some tall posts that we put in, and that just lets them creep forward as time moves on, which I think is an important factor for them. But the lambs, you can't forward creep graze lambs. If you can forward creep graze lambs, ewes tend to go as well, is the problem like in that. And again, I know I'm taking it back to the animal thing. In that system, lambs don't want to go too far away from mum. So they're not going to come through from 100 metres back or 200 metres back down a field to get to the wire to go away from mum. They don't feel comfortable. It's a stress factor.
And then, Alex, so like we said earlier, it's very much a spectrum, and I was quite surprised to hear on the sheep side that you think that the sheep do well even on the taller grass, when some might think they'll have more prone to feet issues, mainly, and also the quality might affect their performance. So.
Well, let's start with feet issues. I think feet issues, there's a high genetic element to feet issues. So there's some that cope and there's some that don't cope. And we have no issue in identifying those that don't cope, and they don't get too many more handlings before they hit the back of a wagon. So there's a genetic element, and when you're carrying a tight density of animals per hectare, if you have one that's shedding worms or shedding foot bacteria or whatever it may be, you spread it very quickly. So you don't want to have that problem in that group of animals. Yeah, I think the tall grass thing works as long as you've got a real diverse sward. If you're running a monoculture system, then I don't think it works. I don't think it would work particularly well. But what they're effectively doing, they're selectively grazing. You put sheep into a field of 10.5 ME, they will graze it to 11.5 in the first 24 hours. So giving them the choice and the right time scales, they will graze out the very best feed. And then they trample and knock the rest of it back down, which then creates this kind of microclimate. And the grass regrows. They tend to think that the grass plant you see today, that tiller is no more than 18 months old. The grass is always tillering, always putting out fresh shoots. So actually by knocking it over, you're just encouraging it to put out more shoots, to retiller itself. You're thickening the plant out and covering the ground more. So there's a lot of benefits in doing that. But because they're not getting pushed to hit a residual, and we've got a greater diversity of plants, we're not then picking up the parasites. So you're not getting the worm. The worm needs a smooth leaf plant so it can manipulate that bubble up and down the plant. Well, if you've got a limited number of ryegrasses in your sward, and we've got a lot of cocksroots, timothies, fescues, other things like grass plants, then that worm hasn't got that choice to move up and down. So we're reducing the prevalence of them in the sward that the sheep are moving into. And I also think, as a cow got 1,000 sensory points on its nose, by law of average, a sheep's probably got quite a few hundred or 1,000 sensory points on its nose. And I wouldn't be overly keen to eating a worm off my dinner plate. So why in the hell are they going to want to wander around? That their nose is right where their mouth is. And if they can identify or sense there's a parasite there, then unless they're hungry, why are they going to want to eat a piece of pasture with a parasite on it? They're just not. So if you give them plenty of choice, then they don't have to eat it. A longer rest period, so the worm, has only got a certain life expectancy. Fluke is a different argument altogether. And then your next run round is a bigger mob of cattle, where they don't tend to cross species.
Yeah, Alex got some good stuff there, and you've got a longer rest period than I have, Alex, by a long distance like that. So I'm taking that as probably a slightly lower stocking density you're running those ewes at because of the rest period.
I think overall the stocking density would be less than yours, but the density per hectare, we're still running 200 ewes, lambs in a mob. Yeah. And we're still looking at a day or 2 day shifts until they're pasture. So the density per hectare is still there. Yeah, but it's not swinging around quite as quick. We're probably 20 days longer in rotation. Yeah, the density per hectare is the same when they're feeding, but the stocking density over the total hectares will be lower probably. Oh, Graham, I'll be a lot less than you. Yeah. Because I think that's the big. I think, and I totally like what Alex is doing for his farming system, but I think the important thing for me is it isn't necessarily suiting every farm. I mean, Alex building fertility in a different thing in a different way. You said about the selection of the best material, and I totally agree with that. So if you've got a lamb going in there, it will select the highest quality material. It will eat that. And you're trading that in to do something else after it. I don't think on our farm or our farm at the moment that we need to build organic material. I think we've already got a good status of organic material within the soil. So I don't think that's something I need to do. We don't see a huge movement on worm population in our system either, to be honest. So we've had 3 fecal egg samples done this year so far. And we've never been above 100 eggs per gram at all. And the densest grazed group haven't been wormed till just after weaning time. But again, like Alex said, is we have got cattle following them. And I do think that has an effect, even on that short rotation time. I think that has an effect. And I think it's because we're not going down to the 4 centimetre level. I think staying up at the 6 centimetre level with these lambs is a thing that stops them. I'm not saying there isn't a genetic trait within our sheep that they're maybe a bit more resilient to worms. I'm not that there might be an element of that there too, but I think the lower you go down the sward, the tighter you graze it, the more you're going to hoover up worms. To my mind, anyway. Like growth rate wise, I think you'll always see that performance like Alex is getting with his lambs because they're selecting the highest quality material. In our system, being pushed even to the 6 centimetre level, they're not selecting the highest quality material all the time.
So it's the balance, isn't it? So it's stocking density. So the per animal, because they're given choice, they're able to keep on pushing going on Alex's type system. But with your system, you're pushing the system that bit more to get that bit more out there.
I mean, Alex, I think for me, Alex will be going to disagree with you here in a second. Is like I couldn't trade in, like say you're trading in 50%. I couldn't trade in 50%, I don't think. Or I wouldn't want to trade in 50%. I would see that as I'd lost that potential of eating that 50%. I would rather consume the best stuff with the ewe or the lambs and then follow and eat a percentage of that with the cows to utilise it and then turn that back into muck and put it back on the ground in that form.
And what is, so if we're thinking longer term, what is the disadvantage of doing that short, so have you looked at your soil organic matter levels or soil, have you ever looked at soil?
Yeah, we've done that previously, but not for about 5 years. We haven't done it.
Okay.
About 5 years ago we did it.
And then also maybe the reseeding interval, is that, how long do you reseed?
No, it's extended. We're reseeding far less than we did previously.
Yeah.
Far less. Again, I think it would matter what type of grass or stuff you were working with, so long as you manage it appropriately to what it wants or what it requires, you will keep that species going. Now, whether that's through keeping it short and leafy or allowing it to get a point where it sets seed and seeds at some point during the year, from the sort of clover point of view and stuff.
Different strategies, yeah. And from your perspective, Alex, is your aspiration to have to reseed a lot less through grazing in this way to favour diversity? Is that fair?
We're not here yet, but I think there's an argument that says that if you manage the system right and you break the farm down into different subgroups within the farm, you can deliver specific land management needs depending on the shortfall within that particular area. And we did it last year. So one of the biggest challenges we've got is managing bracken, and it's a plant that actually quite fascinates me. It's really resilient. It's pre-Jurassic. It's been around for millions of years, and we battle with it all the time. And we've tried the aerial spraying operation. We got grant funded. We spent well into 6 figures spraying it. And 5 years later, we're still battling with it. So last year, once we weaned the cows, we set them off in daily shifts to, it would be a 40 or 50 hectare kind of hill paddock, and that did them a month, right through October into November. When we went into that, bracken was mid-thigh high. I was through it last night just out of curiosity, and it's kind of now below knee, mid-calf height, knee height. So that trampling effect of these cattle through that country has really knocked the bracken's there. It seems to be a wee bit denser on the ground, but it's not as tall. And when you get the plant under pressure, it starts reducing in height just to try and get a better cover on the ground. But the density of the grass now in this particular block has increased twofold, because that grass last year was also nest. The cowpats are still breaking down, so biologically the ground here is very slow. But there's a lot of mushrooms in the cowpats. There's a lot of worms, ants, bugs, beasties all chewing around in there. We're now seeing a huge heap of clover in there as well. There's a bit of flat leaf plantain out there. So we're watching this land and plant succession taking place under us. And whether I wouldn't have had the confidence to fence it last year because of the improvement we're seeing over a year or 2 year period, I've now got the confidence to go in and start building more permanent fences through that land, because I can see we will now get a return of that investment. And I think the key word to all that is confidence. It's having the confidence to try something a little bit different. And if you get the results, you then give it a go. But go back to what Graham was saying, I think we both came into this rotational or rotational grazing strategy at roughly the same time, Graham, you and I, probably 2012, 2014.
Probably the exact same time, yeah.
Yeah, you've come at it from a farm that was heavily stocked and fully productive back then. Well, we've kind of come out of the donkey derby per se, trying to compete in a new market, and we're having to build stocking numbers, build land capacity, and that just takes a little bit of time, and we're never going to get to the output per hectare that Graham will achieve, but we can probably be 100% better than where we were 2012, 2014. And I think that's
the important thing, though. It's not about competing with each other either. Like we've done, both of us have been through grazing groups before and stuff like that. And I think people get hung up on numbers and it becomes a bit of a competition. It's not a competition at all. It's about actually just maximising the productivity of your own business. And like Alex has already achieved, done a huge amount with his business. Doubling that's a massive thing. That's huge. That's huge. Yeah. We're coming at it from a different angle, though. We're looking at different things here, Poppy. We're maybe both looking at the same end game in a certain respect, but we're coming at it a different way. And I think I still maintain every farm's different, and it's about finding the thing that works for you.
I think what part of the conversation is proving is that across Scotland or across the UK for that matter, there is certainly a benefit to be had by changing away from a fully set stock system. But depending on different farm type, land classes, there's a multitude of ways to skin a cat, and it doesn't need to be completely prescriptive.
Yeah, and you don't you need to think about the fact that, like, in our system here, not paddock grazing doesn't fit everywhere. I think some people that go into paddock grazing or looking at different systems feel that they have to do the entire farm, and I maybe felt that for probably the first 2 or 3 years that I got into. I felt if I didn't have it on everything, I'd failed, and actually that's not a failure at all. It's about maximising the productivity from an area or benefiting that area in whatever way you want to do it. It's not about doing it everywhere.
And how would you identify the best places to start, at least, if you're limited in resource and things?
For the start, again, I would get a map out first of all and really think about where I could lay the system out simply. I wouldn't just go for it everywhere, which is probably what I did do. I would lay a map out, and I have a sort of part-time job of doing some consultancy work. And now if I get in the room with someone, the first thing I do is ask for a map. And generally when you get a map out, it's amazing. You look at something and go, all right, that looks really good. That could be really good for that, or that could suit that. And quite quickly you can identify, I mean, yeah, if there's a river running right through the middle of a chunk of it, probably it's not the easiest bit to do it at. It's really not the simplest bit. Cattle are far simpler than sheep. I'm sure Alex would agree with that. It's a lot simpler with cattle than sheep. The gradient of slopes and stuff like that you're working with, and the type of land you're working with, I think it's important to identify what its limitations are. What can you do with it? Where can you get water to? Will you actually do more damage to a piece of land by stocking extremely heavily at some point in time? And what duration of time can they actually be on that to benefit, not be a negative effect?
There's also sighting of gates. Stock flow is a big part of it. How will the stock respond? The stock will take to this a 2-day shift. They'll adapt far quicker than the management will. They get it. They want fresh feed all the time. But where do you site all the gateways? How wide do you make a gateway? If it's a take gate, a target gate, technically, how wide do you make it? How big are your paddocks depends on how many day shifts. How big are your handling yards? Can you handle the number of stock you're going to carry? Or bear in mind, you might need to double your yards. And in a way, the easiest way to learn is every farm's got 2 or 3 or 4 or half a dozen sort of smaller fields. We'll start building a rotation into the smaller fields. So mob stock up, use these small fields that are already in place, give them a 20-day rest, see what happens. And as your confidence grows, I've said to people in the past, don't go and fence the whole field, just fence a corner off, fence a quarter of it off, skip it, don't graze it, put stock into it, graze it, and if you're happy with that, then fence off another quarter. And as the confidence grows that you see it working, then do more. But I did what Graham did, grew a China shop, built 15, 20 hectares of paddocks, way, let's go, we know what we're doing. And 2 years later, I ripped them all out and started again because I made a complete cock of it. but we learned, it's some easiest way. I find failure is the fastest way to learn.
So that's been some useful sort of tips for people getting started. What would be a game changer for you in terms of knowledge or technology or whatever that would help you make the most out of your grazing management?
I think from where we are at this now and what it is that the business is trying to achieve, or I'm trying to achieve, the biggie for me is carbon. It's carbon sequestration. That for me is the one thing in the room that we need to really get pinned down and understand how that works. We're fortunate this now. We've just landed a big kit-off grant, and we've got a PhD student looking at carbon sequestration currently on farm, and getting in place an understanding of diversity of sward, microbial count, biological populations, grass height, grazing density, impact and rest in terms of grazing pressure, the sort of prescriptive measure of how do we maximise the amount of carbon we can sequester and stabilise into soils. That then has a huge knock-on effect to the overall health of the land, the health of the plants. They become far healthier. The stock then, they themselves have to become healthier because the botany is healthier. So we're then producing a healthier meat product. So what one would be the whole carbon thing, and two would be fundamentally scrapping the current grade system for beef and lamb and putting in place a payment metrics that recognises environmental uplift, nutritional density of meat.
Wow. And it definitely ties in well to what we're trying to achieve in this podcast and within the rest of the Farming for a Better Climate resources. Understanding the climate sequestration, it's a bit of a missing element currently in terms of the science. It's something we don't know enough about. Graham?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot more I could do with like stock and density or anything else within our paddock grazing system or grazing systems that we operate on the farm. So there's not a lot I can do more here. The big thing that I've always had is that I think, and I touched on it earlier, is we need a big investment, national investment. The government needs to put a huge amount of money into plant evaluation for our environment that will perform in our environment. And I think we need to be looking at cool season grasses that will grow at half a degree cooler, would make a huge impact. I think you'd probably get nearly a ton of dry matter more out of that if you could do it half a degree. I've touched with this with Fergus Unit recently on it. It's something I think the Scottish Government should be getting into. There's a huge amount that could be done. And we could be a world leader in it. There's not much being done with it at all. Like I've touched on, it's all been perennial. There's a lot more grasses and different clovers and legumes and things out there that could be evaluated. So I think it's a huge investment is required, and then you will see a lift in productivity at farm level, and you'll see a reduction in cost of production. And to that end, you will see a better farming system and a better environment, I feel.
Fantastic. I was not expecting either of those answers, so that's great. But that was good chat. So thank you very much for both of your inputs. It's definitely been food for thought for me and hopefully to the listener. This podcast is designed to complement the fact sheet on grazing strategies that will be on the Farming for a Better Climate webpage. And the webpage is also hosts a whole other load of podcasts, fact sheets, case studies on livestock farm efficiency and means to reduce your carbon footprint. So a whole load of resources out there, and on social media you can follow us there too. So that just to bring our podcast to a close. Thank you so much, both of you, for your input, and I'll say goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. For more information on the topics covered, please visit the Farming for a Better Climate website, and you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.